Hey guys, this is going to be a new series. This series is going to be a little bit different. Some of you have asked me to slow it down um, and kind of really show you step by step, click by click, how I go about creating things. So what we're going to build today is, in addition to, I'm building essentially the town of Phandalin, or a representation of it. And this is going to be a building that can serve as the Townmaster's Hall. And so what I'm doing here, I've got a large 34 by 34 square area. That's because that's what most of my maps are. So I'm just laying this out in a way that it might fall into that area. But I'll ultimately end up cropping this down to just the size of the building. But what I'm looking for here is, as you've seen me start all of my spaces, I'm trying to establish what the shape of this building should be. And I looked at lots of maps and examples of how others have interpreted, um, what the Townmaster's Hall should look like. It's got a basement with some cells in it. Get to that later. But it's essentially the central building in the Phandalin area. And so I'm looking at different walls. It says it's well made, with brick. So I'm just evaluating how I want the overall aesthetic to be for this particular building. And I like this brick option, but I don't really like the color, so I'm going to darken it so it matches a little bit more what I'm going for here. And you can see I'm not using the building tool. I also have my shadows turned off for my wall because I'm going to make my own shadows using the Forgotten Adventures pack. This whole building will be made with Forgotten Adventures, by the way. And now I'm looking for my shadow paths. And I've been favoring lately the 60% shadow path, and I put it at level 400. That way, any furniture I put under or next to the wall will automatically go underneath that path. Anything near the wall will have that um, gathering of light effect. So I want to put my path there at the top. Notice my path's also at the width of 1. It's the default width. There's another path at 60%, another one at 40%, and they're naturally larger. So if you left it at the default 1, it'd be longer. I'm using the shorter of the two paths here. And then I'm going into my shadow objects, which come with Forgotten Adventures, and I'm finding the 60% path, and I'm putting it at level 400 as well in the corner here. That way I can just make those seamlessly connect. And your players won't know the difference, and everything will still fall underneath that shadow. In this video, I'm going to be cutting out a lot of my sort of evaluation of the map. I spend a lot of time just looking at the map, zooming in and out, and evaluating where I want to put things. So if you see cuts and things like that, that's where I've cut those out. Now, this particular map, I want to be able to send in as a prefab and rotate this building in different configurations. Maybe I want a diagonal. And so a good way to do that, to help players still move through it, is to use double doors. So I'll be putting double doors at least at the front to help players sort of enter if this building happens to be rotated at like a 45-degree angle. Now I'm picking my inside walls, and I want the main area to be open for a lot of players, for combat potentially. Never know what might go down in this town hall. And so I'm just evaluating how I want my space to be used here on the back side of this town hall. And I focus on the permanent structures early, like the shapes of walls, where they're placed, fixtures. In this case, I know that there's going to be a basement. And so I'm looking at options for cellar entrances and where that might go. You notice I searched the term cellar, and it gives you a whole bunch of really great options for just automatically made entrances. Now I will need to add shadows to that later. You'll see why, because of those doors. But out of the box, it's a pretty good asset. I'm putting my walls, you notice they're set to under rather than over, so that they go underneath all the other walls that are already laid. And then I'll grab that same shadow path, still at level 400, and I will essentially paint shadows on all of my walls. And as I've said before, this starts to give me a sense of my space, and it helps me visualize how things will go from here. Put some more double doors in so that players could move through these hallways. Eventually I'll get to single doors here. Which, if you're a Foundry user, you may know that players can move diagonally. They hold down the arrow keys, like a down and a left arrow together at the same time, for example, they can move diagonally. That'll help them move through buildings that are not discretely laid out on a grid. I'm picking these wooden doors. If you look closely, the door options also come with what looks like metal fronted doors. For the interior ones, I always put wood. Now I'm finding a pillar. I've searched the term pillar. You'll notice I have my fuzzy search about halfway, just so I can filter out a lot of things. I just go straight to pillars. Sometimes I'll change that fuzzy search. And then I just put my pillars, where they, two walls or walls and doors butt up against each other, and I think they need to look more finished. Here I did a search for stairs specifically, and now I'm just putting some stair pieces together. These are designed this way to be modular and to be able to put stairs, or entry landing or something like that, like I'm doing here. You do have to rotate them, make sure your stairs are facing the right direction. And I generally like that look. I'm going to take off snap to grid. Just press the S button, or you can click it down below, because I want to very fine-tunedly put the shadow over that stair. Also part of fixtures are lanterns and lighting. There's a rusted colored lantern here that I think goes well with this motif. Put it at level 400, because it's going to be generally high up on the wall. There won't be much going over it. And now I don't want to forget this, so I'm just going to create a new layer. But in the lore of the Townmaster Hall, there's a notice board out front. And there happens to be a really nice notice board asset within Forgotten Adventures. So I'm going to put that at a level below, just on its own level. It's all by itself. I'm seeing through that level and comparing the two. So it looks like it's on the same level as this building, but it's not. And I'm just going to create, using I think it's the 20% pattern from Forgotten Adventures. I'm going to make a drop shadow. The reason I'm using 20% pattern is Dungeondraft doesn't deal well with transparencies, specifically shadows, especially gradient shadows, when there's just transparency behind it. So if you stick with a pattern like this that's not a gradient, it will generally come out looking better when you go to export it. So I'm back to the original level that I was at. And of course, windows are fixtures as well. So I want to lay out where the light's going to be coming in, where there might be tactical access points to this particular building. And I'm going to use this wider window, because I like the idea of having some large windows in this town hall. It's this well-built building that isn't necessarily a military building at all. And I'll also use these narrow windows. These are great. Notice I have allow light turned off. or it's toggled to allow light, I should say. It's an odd way that Dungeondraft names it, but this will let light come through these. And if you ended up wanting to use the VTT export function, which I do not use, but if you wanted to use it, this would make these windows export as windows. Decided I don't want window access to the cellar. That's more of a secured area. There's going to be cells down there. Decided I want to make that top right room an office. And of course, I need to find a place to put a bathroom. I always try to put a bathroom, especially if it's in a larger building. I'll do some more pillars here because I've got some new walls to clean up. And then I'll block light again. And I'll put in just a different style door, make it look a little bit less framed, something a little bit lighter that you'd find more in a water closet, which is essentially what this is. And the reason I start with all these fixtures is they define all the things that are going to be set. And then it's just like when you're building a house. You start with the floor and walls, you build the fixtures, and then you add the decor around it. Just helps you if you have a process for how you build these spaces up. And since this toilet is close to the ground, it's at level, I put it at level 100. And that means that I can paint a path directly underneath it. Paths always go under objects. And now what I'm interested in is fireplaces. Where's the warmth going to come from within this building? And I've gone to stair. I'm at level 100. And I've picked this semicircle and I'm resizing it a bit. And you've seen me use this asset before. But I'm essentially going to create the foundation of a fireplace. And in a lot of this old construction, fireplaces, because they were important, they would sit on both sides of the wall. So I'm going to build this fireplace in a way that it's going to be on both sides of this wall. And now I'm at level 300, so I've created a gap between that base and between this top part. This top part's going to be form the top part of the fireplace and the mantle. And the reason I created that gap is so that I can put things inside of it, like the fire and paths or anything like that, and make sure I have some space to work with. Notice you can really fine tune the size of things. You go to your scale tool and you just hit that little up or down arrow and you can just tick it very slightly up or down in size. Now I'm going to go to my path tool that I've been using. This is 60%. I'm going to fade both sides of it. I'm going to drop it down in width substantially. And then I'm going to go up to level 200 since I've already placed that object at level 100. And now I'm going to use my spline tool. So I'm going to hold down shift. I'm going to click and it's going to make it into an arc that I can shape. Then I hold down shift again, click, and I make it to an arc. So this way I've created a lip for this fireplace. And then I'll drop down to level 100 again because I don't need to put shadows underneath this object. This is going to be the logs for the fire. And then if you have AOA's packs, which I can link to in the description, he's just got really the best fire out there. And these are little colorable embers that you can use. And I'm just playing around with making sure that I don't copy some shapes too much with this. But you can see I've got a nice crackling fire that's throwing out some embers. And these are all the fire I put at level 200. So I'm still underneath that lip. And now I've increased the width of my path just a little bit. And I'm just making sure that I'm properly placing shadows where they would go. drop it down a little more and really make that um, beam really kind of stand up off of the rest of the fireplace. And now this is feeling pretty good. And so I'm going to take my select tool, I'm going to lasso the whole thing. It's going to grab all the objects, all the paths, and I'm going to make a prefab out of this because I like this fireplace. And I'm going to use this fireplace again on this map. So I'm going to call it something like fireplace round 1. And now that's stored in my prefabs and I can use that in the future. You'll notice I avoided using any patterns because patterns seem to be buggy. And I'll grab that prefab and I'll just drop it on my map. You can't rotate it yet. You have to drop it. And then once you drop it, you can rotate it as a group. You can see I've just got a duplicate now. Slide it right into its intended spot. And that's how you can create really great kit bashed assets. Now, what I want to do is I don't like typically when I've got a fireplace that's around wood, you just don't see it. And so I'm taking the rock, one of the rock walls, and I'm inserting it here instead of the wood wall, just so I've got what looks like masonry around this fireplace setup. But walls don't play nicely in this configuration. You can see that wall keeps popping in and out of being over or under. So what I'm going to do is split it up. Put these walls underneath them in the right way. There's also an object that you can use. Forgotten Adventures introduced wall objects, and you'll see me use them a lot. It's almost an expansion of the stair objects, which I find a lot of usefulness with when I'm kit bashing things together. And here I'm using an orange light set to the lowest range, a point light, in just about 20% intensity, and then I switch to this diffused light, a little bit higher range, and then I have that actually cast the light down on the ground. And you'll see me use that same combination of point lights and diffused lights to do things like candle lights, fires, torches, things like that. And now I'm going to build another fireplace, and I'm thinking about where this is going to go. Is it going to be one big fireplace in the middle of the room? And where I've landed is I'd like the room to flow through. I'd like these fireplaces to be sitting on adjacent sides. Here I am again at level 300, putting the top piece on, the bottom piece is level 100. I'm going to use the same strategy I used a second ago, but a little bit different shape. And then I'm going to get creative with some of the other masonry around these. Same assets I used before. You notice I'll rotate the fires just to make sure I don't replicate the pattern of the fire too much. I'm going to adjust it very slightly with my scale tool. And while I'm building both of these now, I'm starting to realize that I can just build one, make a prefab, and then replicate it down below. I'm going to focus my time on this one. It's the same path tool that was level 200, so that it could be above the object. And of course, there's a lot of wood around here, so I'm going to start to add some more elements to this, just to make it look like it would be believably inside of a wooden room here. This is just a piece of stair. I'm just very finely tuning its size. And your guess is as good as mine what this actually is, but you find if you vary your materials and you butt things up against each other, you'll start to render what feels like something that actually could look and be built like this. Adjusting my path. So I feel like this is going to be, that bottom piece is sort of closer to the floor. And then I'm just experimenting here with whether that bottom piece itself is set up off the floor. I decided I don't really like that. I like that the bottom piece is sort of part of the floor. And there's a really nice asset called the oven. It comes in different varieties, but it gives you these bricks, which can be useful for a lot of things. I don't want the oven side of it, but I do like the bricks, and did a little cut here. I also put a black, a colorable rug there, and I colored it all the way black. The reason I used it as an object is because I want to make prefab and I don't want to use a pattern. So these rugs that you can color make for great objects. But what I need to do is actually add some, masonry and things to the outside of it. And I'm experimenting with the path tool. This is concrete railing. But you can see it's doing some odd things, at least at the dimensions I've got it. So I'll undo that. And I'm going to adjust my smoothness and my width. I'm going to decrease my width, make it smaller so I don't get those strange artifacts. I am using my spline capability here, so I'm holding down Shift, I'm clicking, and then I'm dragging the curve out. And that's pretty good. I'm pretty happy with that. Not quite done with it yet, but that's feeling right. And again, it's all paths and objects, so I can prefab this thing. And now I'm going to go back into my stair pieces just to find this round asset. I'm going to get it just the right size. And that's starting to feel pretty good as far as a chimney stack. I'm going to go grab my trusty shadow tool. This is the, these are different circles, 40, 60% circles, where you can just spam shadows underneath things. Right now I'm at level 400 and under, so I'm under that stack. And now I clicked over, so I could be over that stack slightly. I just want to obscure that stack a little bit, make it look like it's a little bit more dimensional. Using my same shadow tool, I'm going to start putting some shadows underneath the whole thing. I want to set this fireplace off of the floor. You don't have to be exact here. In fact, the more exact you are, the less natural it looks. I'm realizing here that I've got to adjust my shadows. I'm just going to go ahead and go to edit points and just delete an endpoint on each of those, and it'll delete the whole path. And of course, I just realized after all this effort, I haven't saved my work yet. So I encourage you to make sure you save it. Dungeondraft will automatically back up your work, which is helpful in case something goes wrong. I'm going to go back to that path tool. And I've got transition in is none on one side and fade on the other. And that lets me get rid of just that little bit of gap. And then I'm going to switch it fade and none the other way. So I can close that gap there. There. Now I feel like my shadows are laying somewhat properly. I may still do some adjustments here. Decided I want to see more of this masonry. I think it looks good. Makes this thing look like a really solid, big, interesting fireplace. I'm at level 200 here, and I'm above everything, and I clearly don't want to obscure my fire, so I'm going to pop my fire back up to level 200 itself. There's some weird selecting things that you run into working at this scale, especially if you have things sitting in between layers. Okay, so I like this. I think this is great. I think it's ready to replicate down below. So I'm going to select the whole thing, and I'm going to go back to create a prefab. And I'll give this another name. In the way I architected this is something that I could slide into a wall if I wanted to, or I can drop into the middle of the room. Go back to my prefabs. I put it under decor. Again, you just drop it generally where you're going to want it, and then you go to your select tool. And I'm holding down shift or control, and I'm rotating it. Control will rotate it slower. Shift will rotate it quickly. And once it's in a prefab, you can move the whole thing always until you break it apart, or I believe until you reload the map. If you reload the map, it'll automatically break it apart. And it's helpful to break it apart because maybe you want to make some changes. And go back to my lighting tool, drop the range down to its absolute minimum, low intensity, and I will create the light around the fire itself. And then I'll do the same thing, increase the range a bit, use the more diffused light tool, and I'll have the fire casting some light down on the floor. Now, I don't like that the fire lit up the whole fireplace. Fireplaces themselves are actually pretty dark because the fire's inside of them. So I'm going to the wall tool, picking any wall, and I'm going to decrease the alpha to 0. So I'm essentially making an invisible wall. And I'm going to see how I can block that light. And you can see the effect. It's subtle, but it's effective. That light no longer shines back behind the wall. I just Control Z'd out of that, and I think I'm going to reconfigure my wall even more. I want the light to only just shine on that wood, just on the edge. And the same thing down below. You know, the light is really being directed by the angle of the fireplace that's surrounding it. And that gives me a nice casted light in a way that makes these fireplaces look really good. You can't include walls in prefabs, so you have to do that step every single time. You can include lights, interestingly enough, but I like to add my lights later when I know what my space is going to look like. And I noticed with my prefab that this path didn't copy over. In fact, looks like there's problems with all the paths copying over. And that's just a problem. That's another issue with prefabs right now, is whether it's paths or patterns, it's hit or miss whether they'll actually get stored with the prefab or paste correctly. Often they'll just be omitted. Now I'm going into that wood wall that I mentioned. These are all the walls available in Forgotten Adventures, but they're in pieces. And so just like with stairs, you have a lot of interesting textures that you can play with that you can mash together and create finished objects. So here we're going to make a nice desk. The Townmaster, in the lore, he's doing pretty good for himself. He's probably not the most scrupulous person in Phandalin. I wanted to give him just this, oversized desk, and you really can't find that asset. It's certainly not in Forgotten Adventures. Tom Kartos has some good stuff, but his furniture will clash at larger scale. So even those aren't really options. So what I decided is I'm gonna make my own. So now I'm using some stair pieces. Notice I'm at level 100 right now. I may change all of these to something else later. I'm being particular about whether these are going above or below. Right now I'm going underneath those wall pieces that I just set. I think you're really going to like this desk. I've got some ideas that I like here that I think will be great, and this will make a nice prefab for me later. Notice where my fuzzy match is set, and I can type in wall wood, and I can just bring up all those assets pretty quickly. I have snapped grid off, of course. There's no way you could do this with it on. Now you can look up drawers. You can have these drawers, I'm not going to do it in this case, but you can have the drawers slightly open if you want. Or you can open them after you've placed your prefab later, in some cases you want a drawer to be open and there's a key just sort of peeking out. And you can see already this is effective. Now I'm trying to figure out how to cover up those lines. And I've decided that this Townmaster will, he'll have maybe that's a map of Phandalin, it's a map of nearby area. He operates in intelligence here and has assets that he uses. I use this journal asset a lot. And the candles are colorable now. So you pick a color that you like. I don't like this stark white, so I do a little bit of an off-white. And I'll use that to cover up just a little bit of that seam. And then I'm going to put a shadow underneath it. May seem unnecessary, but I think it works. That's another asset. It's just a candle flame, very subtle. It lets you light that candle, I think, in a convincing way. It's also part of the Forgotten Adventures set. And now I'm just adjusting things a little bit, and I'm evaluating this desk. What else does it need? I really want it to have some real size to it. So I'm going to go back into my wall tool, and I'm going to see if I can add a little bit more layering to it. So this is at layer 100. So I'm down on the floor. This is the footing of the desk. This desk, I imagine, is going all the way to the ground. Make some more fine adjustments. And you'll see here in a second, I'm going to separate these layers a bit, so it gives it some depth. Again, just more really great, useful little shapes inside of the wall tool. And now I'm realizing that I put some of these assets on the wrong level, so I'm having to move them up or down just to make sure that they match, or that they don't conflict with each other on the wrong levels. Okay, now I'm at level 200, and I'm going to draw a path using my spline tool over the footing, but under the desk. And you can see how it starts to separate the two levels, and it gives you a sense of height. Now I'm using my shadow tool to just kind of paint shadows, drop shadows underneath the whole thing. Some more just fine-tune adjustments. Just moving these by a pixel in any case. And now I want gold. And what's new with Forgotten Adventures, I'm loving right now, is all of these pots. These pots come in gold and silver and marble and all these great materials that we don't really have a palette for elsewhere in Forgotten Adventures. But if you find a pot like this one, you can use it for other things. In this case, I'm creating some, some metallic hardware like beading across the top of it. I just really wanted this desk to be more ornate, maybe a little over the top for a little town like this. And now I've got that. It's little metallic components. And now this is something called a spot. It's available in AOA's pack. It's super helpful because it's colorable. I'm going to color this one the same color as my fire. I'm going to zoom in really close, make this really small, put it above that little thing. And now I'm just going to show that the fire is just captured ever so slightly off of these metallic pieces. Maybe it hits those three and that's it. It seems subtle, but it really helps look like the space is really lit. For my candle, I'm not going to go straight orange. I'm going to tamp it down a little bit and use the same strategy though. 0 range, lowest range, small intensity, point light. You just can't overdo it too much. So with your candles, you gotta be a little bit more subtle. And now I'm gonna make a prefab out of this whole thing, including the lights. Of course, I may change those spotlights and other things if I replace this desk somewhere else. But now I've got this desk forever. It's an asset I can use anytime I want. And when I'm building my modular town, I use these a lot, especially building I've gone to making every single building have a tavern version of it. And so it's really easy for me to drag in, a tavern bar of different types into a corner, into an edge, large bar, small ones, things like that. So prefabs have been very helpful in, touching it once and never having to do it again. I'm just showing you what this desk looks like as a prefab as I kind of drag it around the space. Now we're pretty close to the end. In the next one, we're going to start adding more decor to this. And then through the rest of the series, I'll show you how to eventually export this and do some other interesting things with it. Just going to finish up here, throwing a chair into the Townmaster's office. I want it to be a nice chair, one that's entirely too comfortable for his station. Offset it just a bit. You notice I am setting it in the square in case I want to have that NPC sitting in that actual chair. That would be one that I really want to have for gameplay. So I've done that. And then of course I'm obscuring the other side of the desk from where the fire might be casting light. And that's pretty good. I'll see you guys for the next installment. Let me know if you'd like to see anything else. Thanks and have fun making your maps.